South Central Los Angeles, 1983. Franklin Saint is 19 years old, sharp-minded, quietly ambitious, and living in a neighborhood that has been structurally designed to limit what a young black man from his zip code can reasonably expect from his life. He is not angry in the way that poverty sometimes produces anger, explosive, unfocused, self-destructive. He is calculating. He sees the world around him with the particular clarity of someone who has understood, earlier than most, that the rules of the game are not neutral and that playing by them will not produce the outcome he is after. When the opportunity to enter the crack cocaine trade arrives, not as a dramatic choice but as a series of small, individually justifiable steps, Franklin takes it. Not from desperation. From ambition. That distinction is what makes Snowfall one of the most psychologically honest portrayals of how good people end up in catastrophic places that American television has ever produced. John Singleton created Snowfall as a historical reckoning, a ground-level examination of the crack epidemic that devastated South Central in the 1980s, told not from the perspective of policy or policing but from the inside, through the lives of the people who made it, survived it, and were consumed by it. Franklin Saint is not a villain. That is the first and most important thing the show insists on, and it insists on it consistently across 6 seasons of watching him make choices whose consequences compound in ways he could not have anticipated and eventually could not reverse. He is a young man of genuine intelligence and genuine love for his family who chooses a path that promises everything and costs everything, in that order. The lessons Snowfall teaches are not lessons about the drug trade. They are lessons about the specific and universal mechanics of how ambition without guardrails, loyalty without limits, and success without self-examination produces outcomes that the person who started the journey would not recognize and would not choose. Here are 5 of them. Franklin Saint does not decide to become a drug kingpin. He decides, at 19, to move a small amount of product for a man named Avi Drexler because the money is real and the opportunity is in front of him and the step feels manageable relative to the circumstances. He has watched the people around him grind through legitimate paths that go nowhere, watched his mother work herself into exhaustion for returns that barely keep the lights on, watched the neighborhood absorb one generation after another of talent and ambition and produce nothing but more of the same. The first step is not a moral collapse. It is a practical calculation made by a smart young man who has correctly assessed that the system is not going to hand him what his abilities deserve. What Franklin cannot see at the beginning, and what the show tracks with extraordinary patience across 6 seasons, is the architecture of what that first step builds. Each subsequent step is made possible by the last. Each escalation is justified by the investment already made, the people already committed, the enemies already created who cannot be unmade. The trap of the drug trade in Snowfall is not that it is obviously catastrophic from the beginning. It is that it is genuinely rewarding from the beginning, financially, socially, in terms of the respect and agency it produces, and that the costs arrive slowly, invisibly, in the form of changes to Franklin himself and to the people around him that accumulate over years before they become undeniable. The practical lesson here is the one that Breaking Bad also teaches, but that Snowfall roots in a specific historical and social reality that gives it additional weight. The first compromise is the one that matters most, and it matters most because it is the one that feels the least like a compromise. It feels like a solution. It feels like the smart move given the circumstances. The question worth asking before the first step, and it is a question that requires genuine honesty about where first steps lead rather than the optimistic assessment that yours will be different, is whether the path you are stepping onto has an exit that you will actually be able to use when you decide you want one. Franklin always believed the exit was there. It was not. It had closed behind him long before he looked for it. One of the most morally complex and most honest threads in Snowfall is Franklin's relationship with South Central itself, the neighborhood he comes from, the people he grew up among, the community whose destruction he is simultaneously a product of and a contributor to. The crack cocaine he moves does not go to distant strangers. It goes to his neighbors, his former classmates, people his mother knows, people who knew him as a child. The show never lets Franklin, or the viewer, forget this geography. The wealth he accumulates and the ruin spreading through the streets around him are not separate stories. They are the same story, and Franklin is at the center of both. There is a scene in the early seasons where Franklin watches a woman he knows from the neighborhood trading her body for crack, and the recognition that passes across his face is one of the most morally precise moments in the series, the collision between the abstract knowledge that this is what his product does and the concrete reality of watching it do it to a specific person with a specific face and a specific history that intersects with his own. He does not stop. He continues. And the show is honest about why, because the machinery he has built is larger than any single moment of conscience, and because the ability to look away from the consequences of what you are doing is one of the first and most durable skills that the accumulation of power produces. The universal principle underneath this specific story is about the relationship between how you build and what you build on. The business that extracts from its community without investing back. The career built on credit taken from people who did the invisible work. The success purchased at the cost of relationships and environments that were depleted to produce it. These are not equivalent to Franklin's story in scale or in moral weight, but they operate on the same logic. What you build by consuming something cannot be fully separated from the consumption. The accounting eventually arrives. In Franklin's case, it arrives as the neighborhood's accumulated grief and rage turning back toward the man who profited from it. The form that accounting takes in your own life will be different. But the principle that communities remember what was taken from them, and that the taker is rarely as insulated from that memory as they believe, is one that Snowfall documents with historical precision. Franklin Saint's family is the emotional spine of Snowfall, and what the show does to that family across 6 seasons is one of the most sustained and most honest depictions of how the pursuit of power in an illegal economy radiates outward and destroys the people at the center of the pursuer's life. His mother Sissy is perhaps the most devastating example, a woman of genuine strength, genuine intelligence, and genuine love for her son who is drawn into the orbit of what he is building and transformed by it in ways that cost her everything she was before it. His Uncle Jerome and Aunt Louie, his closest friends, his romantic relationships, each of them is changed, damaged, or lost in direct proportion to the depth of their involvement with what Franklin has built. The mechanism is not unique to crime. It is the mechanism of any consuming ambition that treats the people closest to it as resources rather than as ends in themselves. Franklin loves his family. The show makes this unambiguous. But he loves them in a way that is increasingly structured around what they can contribute to and what they need to be protected from, rather than who they are and what they need from him. He manages them the way he manages everything else, strategically, with a primary eye toward the mission and a secondary eye toward their well-being. And people who are managed, however skillfully and however lovingly, eventually feel the management. They feel the distance between being loved and being handled. And when they do, the relationship changes in ways that no subsequent gesture of genuine affection can fully repair. The lesson here is one of the most important in the series and one of the least comfortable. The people who will pay the highest price for your ambition are almost never your enemies. They are the people who stayed closest, who believed in you longest, who were present through the building and therefore absorbed the most damage when the building went wrong. This is not an argument against ambition. It is an argument for honesty with the people you love about what you are actually doing, what it actually costs, and what you are actually asking them to absorb on your behalf. Franklin never had that conversation with his family. He made decisions for them about what they could handle and what they needed to know, and in doing so he removed their ability to choose. The price of that removal was paid by everyone except the person who made it. Franklin Saint is one of the most intelligent protagonists in television history. His ability to read situations, anticipate moves, construct and execute complex strategies, and adapt in real time to rapidly changing conditions is demonstrated consistently across 6 seasons and is never seriously in doubt. He outmaneuvers the CIA, the lapped, rival distributors, and political forces that have infinitely more institutional power than he does. His intelligence is real and it is extraordinary. And it is, ultimately, insufficient, not because it fails him in any specific tactical sense, but because it is never matched by the wisdom to ask the deeper questions that intelligence alone cannot answer. What is this for? What is it doing to the people I love? And what kind of person am I becoming in the service of building it? The distinction between intelligence and wisdom is one of the most important and most consistently overlooked in the culture of achievement. Intelligence is the capacity to solve problems efficiently. Wisdom is the capacity to know which problems are worth solving, what the full cost of solving them is, and when the solution has become more destructive than the problem it replaced. Franklin has the first in abundance and the second almost not at all, not because he is incapable of it, but because the game he is playing rewards the first so immediately and so tangibly that the second always feels like a luxury he can attend to later. Later never comes. The game accelerates. The stakes compound. The window for the wisdom question closes quietly while the intelligence question is being answered brilliantly. The practical implication is about building the habit of the wisdom question into your regular practice rather than deferring it until you arrive somewhere that feels stable enough to ask it. That stable place almost never arrives on its own. You have to carve it out deliberately, the regular honest assessment of not just whether you are executing well but whether what you are executing is actually what you want your life to be building toward. The smartest people in any room are often the last ones to ask this question because their intelligence produces enough short-term reward to make the question feel unnecessary. Franklin is the most extreme version of that pattern. He is also its most honest illustration of where it ends. The most morally instructive thread in Snowfall's final seasons is the question of who Franklin is willing to sacrifice and who he is not, the hierarchy of protection he maintains when the world he built begins collapsing and the resources available to protect everyone run out. The choices he makes in that collapse are not the choices of a monster. They are the choices of a man who has been making impossible trade-offs for so long that the moral calculus has become automatic, who has developed the capacity to absorb the cost of losing some people in order to preserve others, and who has done this so many times that the absorption itself has become seamless in a way that is more terrifying than explicit cruelty would be. What the show understands, and what it documents with clinical honesty in its final episodes, is that the person you become through the accumulated practice of those trade-offs is not the person who started making them. Franklin at the end of Snowfall is not Franklin at the beginning, and the distance between those two people is not primarily the product of what happened to him. It is the product of who he chose to protect and who he chose to sacrifice, repeated across years, until the choosing became reflex and the reflex became character. The show's final accounting is not about whether Franklin's choices were justified by his circumstances. It is about what those choices made him. The answer is devastating precisely because it was not inevitable. It was built, one decision at a time, by a person who was capable of something different. The lesson this leaves is perhaps the most sobering in the entire series. The choices you make about who and what deserves your protection, your loyalty, and your sacrifice are not just responses to circumstances. They are the primary mechanism through which your character is constructed. Franklin believed he was protecting his family by building what he built. What he was actually doing, in the specific choices the building required, was practicing a set of values that eventually made him someone his family needed protection from. Examine your own hierarchy of sacrifice. Look honestly at who and what you are consistently willing to cost in service of what you are building. That hierarchy is not a reflection of your character. It is the construction of it. Choose accordingly. Franklin Saint is not a cautionary tale in the simple sense. He is not a warning against ambition or against the recognition that the system is rigged or against the desire to build something significant from nothing. All of those instincts in him are legitimate and understandable and in another context might have produced something worth celebrating. The cautionary element is more specific. It is about the path, about the foundation, about the people consumed in the building, about the intelligence deployed without the wisdom to direct it toward something that does not eventually turn and consume the builder. South Central is still there. The crack epidemic ended, but the conditions that made it possible did not. And somewhere in that continuity is the show's deepest and most uncomfortable argument, that Franklin's story is not over because the circumstances that produced it are not over. That the choice he faced, between the slow grind of a system that was not built for him and the fast destruction of one that was built to profit from him, is a choice that young people in those same streets are still facing. The lesson is not just for Franklin. It never was.